There is perhaps no single person or brand more associated with breakfast than Mr. John Harvey Kellogg and the Kellogg's brand. And chances are you've almost certainly had one of their products for breakfast. From either Cocoa Pops, Kellogg's cornflakes or Frosties, it's a long list and they've almost certainly cornered the market for breakfast offerings. But what if I told you that Mr. Kellogg and the Kellogg's brand haven't always been associated with cereal? And didn't even want to be known for that to begin with. Because you see, Mr. Kellogg had a burning hatred in his life for one thing in particular. And no, it's not any of his breakfast competition. Kellogg really hated masturbation. And really, he hated almost any kind of procreation. He hated it so much that he would write several books condemning intercourse and would even propose a solution to it by suggesting that men get their areas sewn shut to stop them indulging. Now obviously this idea isn't one that took off, so he had to take a different course of action, and decided instead to create a food so bland, so disgusting and unenjoyable that would provide no nutritional benefit to try and curb any sexual desires that men would have. And he did just that, inventing what we now know as cornflakes. And the biggest surprise of all of this? It actually worked very well, working to completely suppress men's sexual desires to procreate. The only problem is that it wasn't working well enough for Kellogg. After all, what if people didn't eat his cereal? That was an option that people could take. That would leave people with their sexual desires, and Kellogg really didn't want that. He dreamed about a superior race of people that could be bred into existence. So when a company is offering people the opportunity to back a study that would forcibly sterilize people to reduce the population of those less desirable, John Kellogg would immediately back the idea and begin funding it, doing everything he could to stop the masses from breeding. Just in case none of this worked, he'd even fund electrotherapeutic tests to reform and change people's psychology. Basically, he would electrocute people, like children, to make them believe whatever he wanted. He'd even go so far as to fund government studies that would promote his libido-killing cereal and have his products recommended as part of a healthy, balanced diet in the food pyramid, giving him the stamp of approval from the US government and Uncle Sam himself that are still promoted even to this day. This is the story of John Harvey Kellogg and how the Kellogg Company bought the government to stop you having kids. Born in 1852, John Harvey Kellogg will be brought up as a Seventh-day Adventist, where he would be trained to be a doctor. So of course, growing up in any very religious and somewhat niche off-branch Christian household, he would have a severe disdain and little tolerance for any kind of sin, and the Seventh-day Adventists are promoters of a very strict vegetarian diet. So the typical eggs and bacon breakfast and meat-based diet you would associate with many Americans having is something that Kellogg would take a strong disliking to. Along with hating meat and masturbation, he would hate any kind of intercourse, believing it was unhealthy and abnormal. Even though he was married himself, it's believed that he never consummated the marriage and that he and his wife would even sleep in separate bedrooms. Kellogg would write many books on his hate and dislike towards people pleasuring themselves and would describe 39 symptoms he believed to be attributable to this act, such as defective development, mood swings, stiff joints and even acne. Whilst Kellogg's doctor credentials are somewhat questionable, at the time of the Victorian era, anti-masturbation was all the rage and he wasn't alone in his beliefs. Now, writing books about how much you dislike something is only going to get you and your ideas so far. You're eventually going to have to put something into practice, and Kellogg would do just that, jumping on the bandwagon of offering treatments to help stop people from their disgusting acts of self-pleasure. He would take a different course of action to what many other people were offering at the time though. Unlike the restraints and spiked rings some people were selling to men with this addiction, Kellogg, with his hatred of meat and eating meat, believed that the Seventh-day Adventist ideas of a vegetarian-based diet was the solution to a sinless and pleasureless life. Whilst it's known today that having some form of sex drive is healthy, and that when you're unhealthy it's one of the first things you lose, Kellogg and his science believed the opposite. He believed that having what he called exciting and irritating foods would increase the desire for pleasure, and that having boring foods, specifically cereal and nuts, would suppress it. So to promote his ideas out to people and provide them with a product for them to eat that would suppress these desires, he created the most boring food imaginable, Kellogg's cornflakes, becoming the father of breakfast cereals, spawning an entirely new industry in food. Along with founding new food creations, he would also found what would arguably become the health and wellness industry in a way, when he founded the Battle Creek Sanitarium that targeted the middle class and wealthy, providing them a place to go for a health break, and also providing him the perfect place to push his ideas and test his experiments. And with the sanitarium spanning over 30 acres, having the capabilities to hold around 13,000 guests, there will be no shortage of willing or unwilling participants in his experiments. The sanitarium will be so popular in fact that he would even take care of some of the wealthiest and most influential Americans at the time, such as Henry Ford, Thomas Edison and US President Warren Harding. However, that doesn't mean all his guests would be treated the same as them, and it certainly doesn't mean that his status as a doctor would be any less questionable. But no matter how questionable it was, his tests when getting people to eat only bland, dry and uninteresting foods arguably worked. Not necessarily because they repressed desires directly, but because it wasn't exactly what was a healthy diet. So as people became more unhealthy at the sanitarium eating his recommended diet, they would lose their sexual desires over time. Kellogg would also specifically target children in many of his experiments. One of the ways he would do this would be to add toys into the boxes of cereal. If kids knew that they would get a toy in each box, it would incentivize them to eat more of his bland cereal so they could go through more boxes and get more toys. Kellogg would also write other, much darker recommendations in his books for parents, where he would even tell parents to circumcise their children without any anesthesia, believing the pain of the process would be enough to prevent them from having sexual desires ever again. Which thankfully, many of the parents who were in attendance of his seminars at Battle Creek that heard this were horrified. But Kellogg had another recommendation for those parents as well. If they wouldn't circumcise their children, they should instead sew their children's foreskin shut, so they would never get an erection again. John Harvey Kellogg was obsessed with targeting children in his experiments. With such a strong hatred of sex and sexual desires, he believed that the parents were essentially a lost cause. But if he could convince the children and target the children with everything he did, it would have a much greater effect, because they were the ones that would bring in the next generation. Or if he had anything to say about it, hopefully they wouldn't. Many of the practices that John Harvey Kellogg brought in are still seen to this day, with cereal being targeted towards children, a trend that he set a long time ago, along with toys still being in children's cereal boxes. Although John Kellogg hated sex, he was still a firm believer in the idea of eugenics, the idea that you could selectively breed people to be smarter, better looking, and preventing certain undesirable people from breeding. In Michigan, John Kellogg was a leader of the eugenics movement and would deem it to be the only way to save society from disaster. In an effort to promote his ideas, he organized the first national conference on race betterment at his Battle Creek Sanitarium. To encourage people to get involved, he would hold mental and physical perfection contests where children and babies would be judged and given scores based on different traits and attributes, with the winners in each category being given medals. With his efforts, he was able to massively affect education in Michigan, with some colleges in the state requiring students to take eugenics courses, and Michigan would also become the first state to propose a eugenics sterilisation bill in 1897, although the bill wouldn't get passed until 1923. I think it's fair to say that John Harvey Kellogg quite clearly resented the human race, or at the very least, resented all the undesirables in society. Along with his eugenics ideas being passed in state law, his cereal and its sexual desire suppressing capabilities would see the same promotion at state level, with health departments even today promoting cereal as a better and healthier option than foods such as eggs and steak, the same cereal that was designed to kill all your desire for having kids and, in effect, make you infertile. The only difference now being the amount of sugar in the cereals, something that John Harvey Kellogg hated due to it ruining his idea of bland, uninteresting food. The idea to promote these foods and ideologies to stop people desiring to have children seems to be a major point of the Seventh-day Adventists, with many of them even today holding highly influential positions in government and society, where they still promote these foods and diets, talking about their dreams of reducing the human population. The desire to reduce the global population has also led to many of them using their influence and money to lobby for the promotion of the foods they believe to be the healthiest and best at reducing sexual desires, such as unhealthy cereals and other foods that were historically fed to peasants, along with the constant demonization of animal foods and meats. Now, your dietary choices and what you choose to eat are entirely up to you. Just know that it all has its start from a questionable doctor who wanted to sew boys' foreskin shut and put acid on girls, all in an effort to scar them for life and prevent them from ever having these desires again. Of course, the Kellogg's company, as we know it today, is very different to the company started by John Harvey Kellogg all those years ago, and how it is now with its heavily processed and incredibly sugary food offerings are against everything John Kellogg believed, with his heavy emphasis on bland foods. This would be a point of dispute between the two Kellogg's brothers, with John and his ideals of a pure food with no excitement, and his brother Will putting an emphasis instead on profits for the company and always wanting to add sugar to their products. So it would appear in the end that Will would win. However, the end result has remained the same. Target the children with your products, influence them to your beliefs, and make them sick with heavily processed foods to reduce their ability to have children in the future. Now, go enjoy your breakfast.